Today in the News Digest. Massive fireworks in Russian Tatarstan, major oil facilities targeted. The World War III has already begun, stated Zelenskyy, and Putin started it 4 years ago. And the Kremlin is not going to stop it. What leverage the West still holds to compel Moscow to halt its criminal aggression. Drones attacked Russia's Tatarstan overnight. One of the key oil pumping stations, Kaleikino, was targeted, and a fire broke out on its premises, as reported by Russian media. Major production facilities of Tatneft are situated very close to the targeted location. Local sources also note that this area is considered one of the key starting nodes of the Druzhba friendship pipeline. Through the local substations, including other infrastructure around Kaleykino, oil from Tatarstan and neighboring regions feeds into the main pipeline, which runs through the Samara region and continues westward towards Belarus and further to countries in Eastern and Central Europe. Ukraine's defense forces continue their law enforcement campaign against enemy military infrastructure, striking targets both in occupied territories of Ukraine and deep within the Russian Federation. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Flamingo cruise missiles successfully struck the Votkinsk plant in Udmurtia. That is a northern region of Russia that is located nearly 1,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. This strategic facility produces Yars and Bulava intercontinental ballistic missiles, as well as Iskander and Dagger missiles. A fire has been confirmed at the site. Ukrainian paratroopers have cleared 400 square kilometers of territory since the beginning of the year, during a successful operation in the Oleksandrivka direction. Oleksandr Syrskyi, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, has confirmed this. Defenders have restored control over 8 settlements. Military officials emphasize that their primary objective in this sector is to thwart Russian plans to advance into the Dnipro and Zaporizhia regions. While Russian forces are attempting to dig in and hold their positions, the Ukrainian armed forces continue to execute their mission, gradually liberating occupied lands. The war in Ukraine has not reached a stalemate, as combat operations continue unabated across land, air, and sea. In an interview with the French newspaper Le Monde, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrskyi, noted that territories continued to change hands throughout 2025, a clear sign of the high-intensity nature of the conflict. The Commander-in-Chief emphasized that despite Russia mobilizing roughly 406,000 personnel, their total casualties, both killed and wounded, amounted to approximately 418,000. Syrsky acknowledged that while 2025 was a difficult year for Ukraine, the defense forces successfully held the line, particularly in the Pokrovsky direction, while also conducting their own offensive operations.
My task until the end of negotiations is to prevent, by any means, any deep Russian advances into our defensive positions and, where possible, liberate our territory. This is what will ensure honest negotiations that lead to a just peace. Oleksandr Syrskyi, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in the interview with Le Monde.
Every single media outlet in the world seems to be discussing Zelenskyy's words in his recent interview to BBC News, where he said that World War III is already onwards and Putin has started it. And maybe it should be no one else but Ukrainian television, us, UATV, to remind the world that it happens not for the first time. Zelenskyy said that before. The aftermath of Putin's invasion of Ukraine has yet to be calculated by the international community, but without a shadow of a doubt, it was his decision that has set off a path to a full-scale global war. Zelenskyy told NBC nightly news anchor Lester Holt in an interview 4 years ago. And he was telling that to the world ever since, many times, in different studios all over the world, using every relevant public arena and location. World War III is already here, and it is a bare fact for Ukrainians who live in it for 4 years in particular, while in general, for the world, it remains a great question. What do we all do about it?
We have different views regarding a third world war. I believe that Putin has already started it. The question is how much territory he will be able to seize and how to stop him, not because Russia must not win, but because Russia wants to impose on the world a different way of life and change the lives people have chosen for themselves. Therefore, I believe and have long believed that Putin has already begun this war, and we're preventing it from becoming a broad, full-scale Third World War.
And some politicians already grasped what is going on and even have chosen their side. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban threatened to cut off electricity supplies to Ukraine unless oil transit through the Druzhba pipeline is resumed. Also, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has joined Orban's anti-EU stance and stated that Slovakia would block electricity exports from Slovakia to Ukraine if Ukraine fails to ensure the resumption of Russian oil transit to Slovakia. And both Orban and Fico are acting as if Russian dictator Putin has issued his instruction to both politicians a year ago in 2025, when meeting Fico in China.
Shut off their gas supplies that are reverse flowing, shut off their electricity supplies, and they will immediately understand that there are some limits to their behavior in the area of violating the interests of others. Vladimir Putin, Russian leader.
Well, Putin's interests were clearly stated by Putin himself, and they do not change a bit. An indicted war criminal, Vladimir Putin, has announced Russia will continue its large-scale military buildup and called on society to fully militarize. His address to the nation was nothing new. Same saber-rattling, including nuclear. In his address, the Kremlin ruler emphasized his intention to continuously increase the military capabilities of all branches of the Russian armed forces, paying special attention to modernization and the creation of new types of weapons, including elements of the nuclear triad. Also, the dictator declared 2026 the, I quote, year of unity of the peoples of Russia, around a, I quote again, sacred duty. Putin called Russian soldiers who committed war crimes in Ukraine every day for 4 years by now true patriots and the pillars of Russian statehood. Starting a genocidal war and turning its perpetrators into a new elite of Russian society by calling them heroes and pillars of statehood may sound just fine for Russians, and only until the moment at least some of these heroes will return back home to Mother Russia and just act normally. I mean, what's normal for them, for their sacred duty of killing, raping, and just being who they really are, criminals, not war heroes. It is getting more and more obvious to the world that the Kremlin has no intention of ending its war against Ukraine. Latvia's foreign minister, Baiba Bražė, has accused Russia of stalling peace negotiations. Speaking on the current situation, Bražė stated that this is precisely why talks with the Russian side have reached a deadlock. The foreign minister described the process as dishonest negotiations. Her remarks have reignited the debate over what leverage the West still holds to compel Moscow to halt its aggression. More in our story for you.
In the European Union, they are convinced Russia is not inclined towards serious negotiations to end the war against Ukraine. This is evidenced by the Russian army's constant strikes on Ukrainian cities, stated the European Commission.
As long as the bloodshed continues, we will continue to put pressure on Russia. Sanctions have a double effect of limiting Russia's capability to wage war against Ukraine and at the same time to push Putin to come to the negotiating table. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine involves clearly a victim and an aggressor, and Europe will continue to maintain this pressure until we have a just and lasting peace for Ukraine.
From Brussels' perspective, the strategic step should be Ukraine's integration into the European Union. This means long-term financial support, economic recovery, strengthened defense capabilities, and anchoring Ukraine in the Western political economic system. Combined with sanctions, military aid to Kyiv, and international isolation of Moscow, this creates a situation in which continuing the war will bring no strategic dividends to the aggressor, only increasing costs.
What I can say is indeed the discussions that you're referring to relate to the ongoing peace talks, and in this context, EU accession of Ukraine to the EU is indeed being discussed. But we cannot at this stage really prejudge the outcome of these discussions. What I can say is that indeed EU integration can contribute to our common objective, meaning securing peace and prosperity to Ukraine.
The West can make it so that for Russia, the war against Ukraine never ends in victory. All that is needed is political will, writes The Telegraph. Over 4 years of full-scale war against Ukraine, the Russian army has failed to achieve its goals, but has suffered losses that, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, already exceed 1,258,000 people. And in the last 2 months alone, the aggressor country has lost more people than it has managed to mobilize.
It took the Soviet Union just under 4 years to resist, expel, and defeat Hitler's forces and regime. In November 1941, the Germans almost reached Moscow. By May 1945, the Russians had captured Berlin. All that in less time than Russia has now taken to occupy about 20% of Ukraine, even when you include previously occupied Crimea, from a publication by The Telegraph.
It is the aggressor that must make concessions when concluding a peace agreement, Vice President of the European Commission Kaja Kallas is convinced. According to her, the Geneva talks once again showed that Russia is not backing away from its maximalist demands. Putin is dragging out the negotiations rather than striving for peace.
Next Monday, we aim to adopt the 20th sanctions package against Russia. Sanctions are working, they are severely hurting Russia's economy, and each new measure further limits its ability to wage the war. Moscow is not invincible. Its army is suffering record casualties, and its economy is under heavy strain. But Putin won't end this war until the costs are higher than the benefits, and that is the point we must reach.
German Chancellor compared Russians to Nazis because they literally conduct, quote, Nazi propaganda against Ukraine. Friedrich Merz stated, "It is time for Europe to learn to speak to Moscow in the language of strength." EU countries continue to increase defense budgets. Representatives of Germany, France, Poland, Italy, and the United Kingdom reported.
As Europe's leading defense powers, we're taking responsibility for our own security, developing low-cost air weapons to keep our people and our nations safe. Our first project will use cutting-edge technologies, learning the lessons from the battlefield in Ukraine, and at a time of increasing threats, it's actions, not words, that will deter Putin.
Thus, the West is making it clear. The key to peace lies not in concessions to the aggressor, but in consistent strengthening of pressure. Sanctions against Russia, military support for Ukraine, and the prospect of its EU membership can change Moscow's strategic plans, analysts believe. The West is betting that with sufficient political will, the Kremlin can be compelled to real negotiations for a just and sustainable peace. Reported by Natalia Husak, Volodymyr Shtenhalov, UATV News.
Thanks for watching News Digest. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.